Welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for attending this webinar today. I'm really excited to host a fantastic panel with some of the admissions team from Yale-NUS College. And today we're going to be discussing how universities can expand their reach without actually leaving campus at all, and look at the kind of story of Yale-NUS College and what they've been doing and what's working for them. We'll also give a little bit of background to Unibuddy and open it up for some questions at the end. Before we kind of get into it, I just want to kind of do a little bit of housekeeping. So this is a webinar. We've got a Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom. There's also a chat box if you want to add any comments on anything that you kind of hear or want to share. And it's also worth noting that this session will be recorded. So if there's any portion of it that you'd perhaps like to share with a colleague afterwards, if you can't make any of it or if you missed the beginning, although I realize if you missed the beginning, you're probably not watching this now, but at the same time, we'll be sharing this recording afterwards. Yeah, just something worth noting. So before we get started, it's probably best to kind of go through a few quick introductions so you know who we have on the panel today and who's talking. So I'm gonna kind of open it up with Chris, if you could give a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Sean. And hello, everybody tuning in for this particular webinar. My name is Chris, and I'm from the admissions team at the Admissions and Financial Aid Office at Yale-NUS. I've been with the team ever since 2017, so coming up to almost 4 years now.
Fantastic. And Jasmine?
Wonderful. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Chris. So I'm Jasmine. I'm the Director of Admissions here at Yale-NUS College. And basically, I oversee the review and the recruitment of all our amazing students in our small and intimate community. Over to you, Sean.
Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, I'm Sean, and I'm the University Partnerships Manager here at Unibuddy, responsible for, I suppose, new partners and prospective universities who are interested in Southeast Asia and East Asia in implementing Unibuddy, and I kind of help them through that journey and learn what we do and how I can kind of best support institutions. So a few of the topics that we'll be going through today, one of the big ones will be, Yale-NUS College's story and the place that Unibuddy's had to play in that. And some of the key topics we'll be discussing is, impact of implementing the student voice and why that's an important thing to consider, as well as some of the marketing insights you can start to develop from conversations that students have and the voice of your current students and prospective students. And towards the end, we'll also have a few Q&As for us all to go through. Before we get started, I think it's probably best for you to have a bit of a background as to what Unibuddy does. I know a lot of the attendees on today's webinar are very new to Unibuddy, and this is almost the first time they're seeing it. So I think a bit of background is to know that Unibuddy is a tool that universities are using as part of their digital journey. And we kind of see it as there being 3 key steps in the digital journey, especially where Unibuddy kind of plays a role to reach and reassure any and all of your prospective students. And the first one is how important real experiences are and why you should be sharing them, because a recent QS International Student Survey found that 74% of prospective students actually opted and said that they would prefer to speak to a current student than a member of staff. So it's worth noting this is something that students are looking for. They're trying to find ways to speak to students, and if there isn't a way that you're already guiding, they're probably finding a different way through social media or some other form. The second step is about building the confidence. And it's worth noting that about 87% of decisions are actually influenced by personalized communication in some way. So it's about finding alternative ways to give those really kind of authentic conversations and know that any answer that they're given is personal to them. It's not a generic messaging. And the third step is about creating belonging, because it's quite terrifying to think that 1 in 5 students don't actually feel represented in their student advertising. So finding a way to ensure that, especially for international students and widening participation, that any of them can see themselves there, perhaps through the shoes of one of your current students, is really key. And that's exactly kind of where Unibuddy comes in. So Unibuddy is a platform that helps students make better decisions through sharing the experience of your current students, so that they can make that better informed final decision. The way it works is the fact that Unibuddy is a software that you essentially embed on your website, and you can put it on different pages. If you were to go to Yale-NUS College's admissions page, you'd see there's a friendly little face in the bottom corner of one of their current student ambassadors. And if you were to click on that face, it would start a conversation with one of their student ambassadors. On here is an example, but you essentially have a widget whereby you can select students from the same country as you or studying the same course, and ask them about what life is like studying there, what you need to be doing that course, and help them essentially work out if that's the right decision for them. So that's a brief overview of Unibuddy. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and kind of jump into the questions. So it's actually, I think, with yourself, Jasmine, it's been almost a year since we first had a discussion about Unibuddy, and then that discussion kind of went on over a few months. I know we had different kind of virtual events and summits that you actually attended, but it would be good to know, I think it's been since October that you launched, so over the last 5 months. Would it be possible to kind of find out why you first chose to use Unibuddy at Yale-NUS?
Sure, Sean, no problem. As you mentioned, right, we've had a 5-month experience after launching Unibuddy on our website. So the question is, why Unibuddy? I think it really comes down to our office, and I think what we're looking for in digital interactions with our prospective students. As I'm sure many of the attendees here today are looking at this juncture, right, for creative and authentic ways to connect with their students, since we are unable to travel and meet students in, pre-pandemic, so I would say traditional way. And I think our research and in-house data really shows that our prospect pool, even locally and domestically in a very small country, really enjoys having the opportunity to interact digitally with current students. And having surveyed, I guess, the market and different products, Unibuddy just seemed to be a really good fit in terms of the way it's built and integration. And so, all the technical backstory stuff, which I'm sure our analysts can go into. But it just was a really good fit for us, and that's how we ended up going with Unibuddy.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it's good to hear. I know that, I suppose, with the lack of in-person events and work that you can do, I suppose finding those digital alternatives and knowing that you've done the research, that you're selecting the right one, is key. Would you say that there's kind of any recruitment goals in particular that you'd say that Unibuddy supports with?
That's a great question. And in thinking about it, I think, every office has very different goals depending on shape, size, enrollment targets, demographics, and things. And I think what we're commonly, I think, trying to achieve at this moment really is to continue the conversation, right? No matter if you're an institution based in Southeast Asia, or you're in North America or Europe. I would say, broadly speaking, the challenge for the higher education industry is to be able to continue a conversation with a prospect. That is the I guess the soul and the bread and butter of our business. So Unibuddy has been one aspect, right? One tool that allows us to meet that goal. Beyond, I think, encountering somebody via their email address. That's what we get. And then saying, here's the website, go and check us out, or here's an e-brochure. So that's been excellent. And I think the second thing, which Chris will be able to expand on a lot, is really engaging our student community. In a time where many students themselves feel very isolated from the outside world, and students who volunteer with us and who work with us look forward to having these interactions. And this was just another way, I think, for us to give them an avenue to feel, part of that process and to feel valued.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's really good to hear, and I think it's really key when you want to give them something a little bit extra, considering how big the decision they're going to make and the investment they're going to make with their time and money, and also opportunity. Giving them as many different avenues to have that conversation is key. And a quick question for you, Chris, because I know that you've kind of played a big role in the implementation and the management of the platform. Would you be able to kind of tell us a little bit about how you found kind of getting started with it, and whether or not, did you have an ambassador program before? Did you make one specifically for this? And if not, how that's been set up?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I think in terms of putting the widget sort of on the website and actually rolling out the program, I thought it was pretty straightforward. So there is a step-by-step guide that you sent over to us. And so even though this platform was, I guess, completely new for us, we just followed all of the steps, checked all the boxes to make sure that all the things were in place. And then we also hopped on to the training guides that Unibody provided as well. But we also tweaked it for our own context as well, given the fact that we are a liberal arts college and that we're also located in Singapore as well. But beyond that, not too many hiccups. And the students also had quite a positive experience. The interface was quite familiar, I guess, for most mobile apps. So for them, it's really easy to kind of switch the way that they would actually navigate the platform as well. And for the second part of your question, we do have a student ambassador program, and it's been around for as long as the college has been around, actually. So just to give a little bit more context, there are quite a number of campus job opportunities at Yale-NUS, as I'm sure is also the case for a lot of the universities where the attendees are from today as well. So we call the program the Student Associate Program. And so some of the students who choose to work with us are on the Tours and Outreach team as part of the Student Associate Program here on campus. So when Jasmine was talking about the different kinds of ways that we use student voices in previous times, especially pre-COVID, a lot of those student ambassadors who worked for us in pre-COVID times have basically shifted over to a different platform. So we didn't have to create a brand new student ambassador program from scratch. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that must make things considerably easier, I suppose, if you've already got that base and those students to select from. Okay, cool. And yeah, it's great to hear that the implementation process was easy for you. So that's awesome. I know that this is a question that comes up quite a lot for me, especially when I'm speaking to new universities and ones who are quite new to the idea of student ambassadors. One of the questions is, how do you incentivize your student ambassadors, and how does it work that way?
Before, I think Chris can give you details on that, but I will just caveat by just saying, our office is just very privileged, and I think our institution, as it were, that we have resources to pay our students, to work with us. So that is one important part of the incentivization. And yeah, so Chris, take it away.
Yeah, so we are quite in a fortunate position as well. And one of the things that we do to incentivize is actually a point that Jasmine has already touched on a little bit earlier. So one of the motivating factors for a lot of our student ambassadors is the ability to kind of meet prospective students, to meet both local and international students as well, who are in that position where they're considering their higher education options and if Yale-NUS is a good fit for them in terms of their academic aspirations. So I think that's definitely one of the things that they're looking at. It helps them practice a lot of their public speaking about how to represent themselves and to represent an institution, which I think are skills that they are looking forward to practice. And I think beyond that as well, quite a number of our students are motivated by a strong sense of gratitude. So they understand, they've been through the entire process from researching colleges to the whole application and then interview, and then actually coming in as full Yale-NUS students. So I think a lot of them are actually quite motivated to make that process a little bit easier to understand, especially if a prospective student is navigating it on their own or navigating it for the very first time without much help and support around them. And plus, I think our students are more than happy to talk about the different opportunities and the different adventures that they get up to as well, more generally.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really great to hear. I was actually one of the members of our product team recently put together a video interviewing our student ambassadors right around the world, and it seemed the common theme was definitely them looking back at their own experience of the admissions journey and kind of thinking and wishing what could have made my decision easy and what could have made my life easier. And that was almost always one of the reasons that they became a student ambassador and why they wanted to help future prospective students. But I think it's worth noting that for any institutions that aren't able to pay their student ambassadors, that typically that if you were to kind of send a message out, there is actually a strong pool of volunteers and advocates for your institution who are out there and probably willing to help with this. And alternative incentives to involve kind of professional recommendations from the teams that they're working with, especially for a lot of these undergraduates. Universities is one of the only places that they could get one of these recommendations. And typically that they're selecting very outgoing and passionate advocates for their institution to be their student ambassadors. So just a few other things to note on this. And kind of bringing it back to the peer-to-peer and the platform, Chris, do you have much feedback? Have you found out how your student ambassadors feel about using this software?
So I think one of the things that really helped with managing expectations on their part is that we told them that it was kind of like the other messaging apps out there. So like if we ask them anything about Facebook Messenger, if we ask them anything about WhatsApp, it's kind of the same way in which they actually interact and have those conversations. Although the one thing we did say that is probably going to be different is that there is going to be a delay in terms of how the conversation flows. So typically in a pre-COVID time, if a student walked up to a booth, obviously the conversation happens in real time. And so from start to finish, it could take anywhere between 8 to like 12 minutes, for instance. Whereas I think for Unibuddy, taking into account the fact that we are having two students talking across different time zones, there is that ease of just accessing the mobile app from time to time as well. I think that's definitely one of the things that they had to get used to, that the fact that they may not get a response as quickly, which is I think the same for the prospective students part as well, that they realize that the person that they're talking to is not in the same time zone. So they might be asking 5 or 6 questions, but the student ambassador is actually like sleeping because it's 4 a.m. here in Singapore.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's been quite positive so far. Really intuitive to use. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. And also about kind of breaking down those time zones, because I think that's a really important aspect, to almost let the students know that and be reasonable. This is an asynchronous conversation, so it's going to take place over several days, several hours. And typically, students will come back, prospective students will come back to the platform and ask multiple questions, sometimes at different points during the admission cycle as well. So they might do it at the very beginning, and then they'll come back, 2 or 3 months later when they have an offer and ask more questions to the same ambassador that they were speaking to before. So just a little bit of background of where it can be placed and how these conversations are set up. Awesome. So kind of moving on to a little bit more of an international focus, I suppose. It would be good to know, how does Unibuddy, the Unibuddy platform, actually sit amongst your other international recruitment activities, and what else are you doing?
I'm smiling, Sean, because I'm thinking to the days where traditionally we would be on a plane and moving city after city and like catching 10 flights in 8 days, and enjoying airport food. But jokes aside, so obviously the challenge that a lot of people are facing across industries, not just education, is the inability to meet people. Without going into too much detail, I think the international recruitment strategy that we're adopting for the year or years coming, actually, I think, is to buckle down on digital and virtual outreach. I know some other offices have a range of more traditional, like going back to paper and print methods of reaching out to their clients and their prospective students, but for us, it's and for our resources, I think we're quite focused on virtual interactions. So I think where Unibuddy sits for us is it's a tool that we're using for contacting prospects. Obviously, that's a big part of it. But for a population of our size, because we are a very small school, I think it is also a tool that we can use at the, what we call it in higher ed, the yielding I think, element, because naturally if a student receives an offer from a school, they may have questions that cannot be answered by your website, your prospectus and other information that's on the internet. And we need our current students to actually fill that information gap for them. And that used to be able to be achieved by in-person visits, for example. So that is one of the ways in which Judy Buddy is basically helping us to close that gap in information for our candidates.
Fantastic. That's really good to know. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Chris?
Oh yeah, I was just about to jump into maybe give like a more, I guess, underground / granular perspective of how we use it as well. And so again, as Shaz was saying, I think all universities have turned to digital or virtual solutions, particularly in this day and age. Whether or not they're looking at domestic recruitment or international recruitment as well, I think digital or virtual is often the most safe these days, and the most likely to also go through in terms of an event as well. So I think definitely where we use it as a tool is to complement a lot of the virtual outreach that we're doing. So whether that's any of our regular virtual events that we're holding, or any of our, I guess, bigger or annual virtual events that are also happening throughout our typical recruitment cycle or recruitment calendar as well. And I think personally, from interacting with a number of high school teachers or university guidance counselors as well, they've often asked us to, I guess, repeat and reiterate where the different resources can also be found. So I think that's also quite a helpful way to say, oh, here is our online brochure. Here are different ways in which you can also learn more about a particular university. And then making sure that we list all of the different touch points and all of the different ways that we can interact, especially during this time where face-to-face meetups can't really happen as frequently as previous.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Just like letting the students know what's available to them, and if they have the questions, that there's almost like a list of different tools and web pages that they can go to find it, which often if they can't find it, then it almost kind of not even considered. So it's great that you're making them aware of that. I suppose on that note, how does a prospective student typically find a current student to speak to? How do these kind of peer-to-peer conversations begin, and where do they come from?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of ways in which they can find a way to the peer-to-peer conversation. So as I think you've already mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the widget is on the admissions website, and so there's like a little pop-up smiley face that comes out at the bottom right of the screen saying like, hi, like, would you like to chat with a current student? So I think that's definitely one of the ways in which we help guide prospective students to the widget itself. But on our end of things, we also embed it into quite a number of our virtual offerings that we typically have. So for instance, we also run regular virtual visit day events. So that replaces our in-person campus visit that we used to have pre-COVID-19. So we don't always answer all of the questions that come through in some of these sessions, depending on the time of the year. So one of the ways in which we also try to encourage people to continue the conversation is through Unibuddy, through social media, or through emailing us, if that is a platform that is more convenient for them as well. So making sure that we tag it on to all of our existing virtual offerings. I think the other way that I would mention really quickly is through our other social media platforms as well. So depending on whether they're on Facebook, which I guess very few of them are, as a lot of studies will show, or Instagram or on TikTok, we want to make it quite clear that a social media platform can actually lead to other avenues in which students can also actually have those touch points or lead them to those touch points if they have more questions or if they just want to chat with the student about their own student experiences.
Yeah, I've looked at your Instagram page a few times actually. I know that there's now a story dedicated to your chat with the students option, and quite often social media is, when you're looking at admissions and student recruitment teams, social media is dedicated to showing off student life and what your life could look like if you come here. So it's great to see those alternative avenues to begin a conversation that isn't just reliant on, I suppose, them arriving at your website. Also with the events, that is a common thing that a lot of institutions do as a kind of call to action following an event. The option to speak to a student is quite a powerful one for extra questions that might come up. Fantastic. And so I mean, this is a question for both of you, so feel free to kind of to jump in. But why do you think that the voice of your current students is particularly powerful, and particularly powerful for international prospects?
I think at the start of the presentation, you shared a little statistic, I think probably was by QS, about how I think student voices in general, I think are very, critical to the decision and choice making mechanism. Where to go, how do I know I'm going to enjoy it, and it's a huge investment decision, as you've already mentioned, Sean. So I think for us in context, the international student that's looking for us is obviously looking at, I would say, a fairly non-traditional choice, a very small community as well, offering the liberal arts in Asia, of which there are not many institutions of a similar type and structure. So for the international student, who is now, I think, living possibly in a state of isolation, not being able to go to school as per, the regular time and communicate with others, I think being able to connect with somebody who they can identify as a real individual and have that human connection is very, very important. And this is not just for recruitment, but broadly speaking, I think people desire connection at this point in time. So that, I mean, hence the students are doing a great job right across all the work that we do to work with prospects.
That's so great to hear, and I think it's great to know that the authenticity part of it is such a key message. It is something that everyone's looking for at any point in their life, especially when it comes to higher education and making that decision. So thank you for that. And I suppose kind of building on that, it might open it up to finding out what are the type of questions that your students typically get asked. Is there a common theme from your prospects? Chris, perhaps you might know a bit about this.
Sure. So I would say quite honestly that any kind of question can really come in through the platform itself. So I would say that anything that is traditionally asked when we do an in-person school visit, or any kind of question that would come in through a typical admissions email inbox, I think all of that is fair play when it comes to the Unibody platform as well. So just to give you all the audience members a sense, there are definitely questions that come in based on a kind of identity affiliation. So for instance, if they see that the student ambassador is from the same country, or if they're interested in the same course of study, or they have similar extracurricular interests, I think definitely there are questions that are targeted specifically to those different opportunities that they see in the ambassador profile. But I think the nature of the questions also shift depending on which part of the recruitment cycle we're in as well. So when we launched initially in October last year, I think a lot of the questions were more exploratory. Tell me more about Yale-NUS, tell me more about the student experience, what is it like being an international student, studying overseas, and I think unsurprisingly, what is it like to be studying in a time of COVID-19? How has that changed the residential experience on campus? So questions like that. Moving closer to our round deadline, so particularly in late December into the first half of January, where our round one deadline came out on the 15th of January, more specifically, the questions became very technical. So they were less about, oh, tell me about the courses, the different modules, the different classes, or extracurriculars, but things like, how do I know if my teacher has sent in their letter of recommendation, or how can I access a scholarship or a financial aid application, or how do I submit this particular document, and how do I know whether this person has it or not? So I think there were a lot more questions that were specific to their own application, or to help them through their own application process as well. But literally, I think anything could come in from the platform. Yeah.
That's great to hear. And I've one of the stats that were recently pulled is the number of messages on Unibody exchanged about toasters and kettles, which I found quite funny, especially students who are moving to out of home perhaps for the first time, thinking about what do they need to bring. If I'm going to share a kitchen, is there going to be 15 toasters and kettles, or should we just bring one? So it was interesting to kind of see how different students use it. It's a lot of it is information they probably could find, but they prefer to speak to a current student about it than trawl through the website and find it. So yeah, we also got a message asking whether or not this recording will be shared after the webinar. It's worth noting for all the attendees that this is all being recorded, so you will be able to access that later. Moving on, actually, so we kind of touched on social media. Obviously, that's a very important part of this. I'm interested to know what are the ways that you're using, I suppose, your current student voice in your marketing and more specifically in your social media.
Sure, I'd be happy to share about that. So we do use them on social media quite a bit. So for instance, this year on our Instagram page, we've actually focused a lot more student ambassadors and student voices in a takeover series. So ever since the year started in January, we've had different kinds of students do takeovers. So we give them reins of the account for about 24 hours. They often answer questions throughout the day. So when they're posting different stories or videos about themselves, it's sort of real time of what's actually happening in the day, either in between classes, or if they're grabbing a meal in the dining hall, or if they're involved in their own extracurricular activities as well. And I think that also adds to the kind of authenticity and the unscriptedness, because they're just following around, you're just following around this person as they go about their day, as they attend classes and do whatever else that they have in terms of their commitments for that particular day. But beyond social media, again, I think we would use our regular events and any of our virtual events that we have on offer. And I guess also featuring lots of student stories, student anecdotes, and student quotes as well, in other, I guess, more quote unquote traditional forms of marketing. So whether that's using the website or printed collateral as well.
Yeah. That's really good to hear about. I know that the student takeovers was taking over social media in some ways, especially for the universities. It's really great to see that, like you said, unscripted life of a student, and anything can pop up whilst they're live streaming what they're having for dinner or walking in between classes. Cool. All right. So kind of moving on to the final few questions here now. We're interested to kind of know about your plans for the future and what life looks like for the rest of 21, hopefully moving out of the stages of COVID quickly. I don't want to speak on that too fast, but yeah, hopefully that's the case. How does the UniBuddy platform, both for the chat and even looking at some of the events you're hosting, how does that fit and sit in the planning that you have moving forward in 2021?
Sure, I can take this one. So, as you know, we've just talked about, and Chris has given lots of great detail. So we have I wouldn't say an arsenal, but we have a range of tools that we use to engage our students and obviously our partners in education, from social media to more traditional events and things. So we really enjoy using the chat function. I think the students who use it also really enjoy it. So we have had a few months of runtime with it, and we intend to keep it on for at least a little bit to see what else we can do. I think what we are trying, or what we would like to do, I think, is to see how we can use all our tools, including UniBuddy, for more nuanced use. The market is obviously developing, and there are lots of unknowns. And I think staying nimble and just adapting to the circumstances will be very key to success in the next couple of years.
Absolutely, yeah. I think just keeping it open. Don't make too rigorous plans, I suppose, and seeing what comes up and how to solve it as you go through. Awesome. And I think there's just one more question from us here. So if any of the participants do have any questions specific for Jasmine or Chris, or even for myself, feel free to start adding them to the Q&A function now. But my last question for you two is, do you have any kind of top tips that you have for perhaps other institutions who are currently struggling to reach a global audience of students?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. So I think one of the things I've definitely learned, especially recruiting from a more kind of digital heavy or a virtual only sphere, is that there are definitely like challenges that crop up along the way, both for universities and higher education institutions, but also on the high school side of things as well. So I think for both sides, it is a bit of a struggle sometimes to make sure that those connections still go through, even with virtual solutions intact as well. But I guess some of the things that I've done in the past is that when I'm getting acquainted with a new territory or with a new school, I always make sure to introduce myself, mention past applicants if we've had them from those particular schools, especially if they've matriculated as well. So I think that makes it easier for the high school counselor or the university guidance counselor on the other end of things to also understand a little bit about which student might be the right fit or which student might be interested in that particular institution as well. The other thing that I would also do is to try and write short blurbs, especially if I'm introducing myself to a new counselor for the very first time, what Yale-NUS College is about, and also give them links to our different virtual platforms as well. I think quite a number of high school counselors are quite appreciative because they would just copy and paste the blurb into their regular newsletter, a newsletter that goes out to parents, for instance, particularly about higher education, or even if they are sending a mass email to the student cohort to try and advertise different kinds of outreach events as well. Yeah, I think the last thing I guess I would say based on observations from last year or the second half of last year is that if there are sort of key events in a particular country or in a particular market, trying to make sure that you gain presence in those key events in those markets could also be a really helpful tool to make sure that you also have optics on your own higher education institution. Yeah.
I was just going to make a little plug for looking at the data, but I'm sure that everybody's heard that phrase way too many times, like data-driven approaches. But it really does, it really is very critical, I think. And I mean, in this case, the product already offers lots of easy to access insights. And I think for us, measuring success and understanding what those markers of success are really, really important. We are, as a very young institution, have met different kinds of challenges. And I think constantly evaluating and rethinking how we're doing things has been very helpful in shaping our approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that measure of success is a key part of hopefully what everyone's doing, and identifying, I mean, it usually is to do with data, but if it is in other ways, then great. Identifying some key data points to work with, and that's, every conversation that I have with the university, most of the conversations start to end with what would be the key metrics of success. What are you looking to get out of this? And ensuring that they've identified that before moving forward is really key, because then kind of what you're working towards and how it could be best supported. Awesome. So we've got a couple of questions starting to come in here now. So we've got the first one from Tim. He's asked, are your students trained to have recruitment conversations, or is it open peer-to-peer engagement?
It's a great question. I'll jump in really quick, and then I think Chris can fill us in because he works very closely with our students. So our students work with us, as Chris has said, I think because there's a great desire to give back to the institution. They want to help other students navigate what is a very confusing college application process. I feel that we support them in guiding them, I think, on how to approach, unknown people, right? How to have professional conversations about your institution, how best to represent us. And also, I think, how to manage difficult conversations, and how to seek support and all those great things if they need the help. But to answer the question bluntly or quickly, I think students that work on the platform are not trained to have a recruitment conversion conversation. They're not asked to in any way try to identify whether a student is best matched or fit. It's purely for them to have a conversation with that person and share the information that is relevant and helpful to that person's decision making. Yeah, Chris, you wanna pop in?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Jasmine has already shared. So there isn't a specific way that we want all of our student ambassadors to approach these conversations, but more often than not, we're just equipping them with the right knowledge, for instance, of the different things that a prospective student needs to know about, for example, in the application process, if they are submitting an application, and also lots of tips and tricks to present their own experiences, because we want to make sure that their own experiences in the classroom, outside the classroom, in the residential spaces do come front and center, because that's what we want to showcase in those conversations. And then a few tips and tricks about how to say no politely, I guess, to guests who are sometimes a bit pushy or sometimes a bit demanding in trying to get information out of our students. So for example, one of the categories of questions that we still get, whether we did in-person outreach pre-COVID and now on Unibuddy, is that sometimes the prospective student will ask for personal contact information, so their own phone number, for instance, or their personal email address. Parents in the past have also asked about final testing results. So what did you get for your IB diploma? What did you get for your A-level results? So one of the things that we also train our student ambassadors to do is to try and navigate their way politely, but also assuredly out of those tricky situations, because that's definitely not an expectation that they reveal personal bits of information about themselves as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's important that anyone who is an ambassador and is the face of your institution has at least some training in how to answer those difficult questions. So it's great to hear you have such support. And I suppose it's almost part of the reason that they become an ambassador in the first place is to start to be equipped with those extra skills that you can offer them and train them in. It's one of the bonuses, I suppose, of being a student ambassador. Awesome. Yeah, Tim, thanks for that one. He says difficult conversations is a great point. So thank you, Tim. We've got another question that's come in, and they're asking about when in-person events start again. Have you thought about perhaps how you could integrate peer-to-peer technology such as Unibuddy in that, and what that would perhaps look like?
This is a difficult thing to, I guess, project, foresee. I wish I had the crystal ball of when will it happen. But I think when in-person events become available to us again, the reality, regardless of industry, is that this virtual and digital, reality that we've become very accustomed to in the last few months will not go away. And the real question will be, how do we, with the same resources that we began with last year, be all of these things to a market that will continue to grow in appetite? I think once the in-person events come back in, it's very likely that you'll see prospective students and their families still wanting to do both. They will want to do the lunchtime, visit day with you and chat with your student ambassador and email you, and they will also want to take an in-person campus tour. So I think it's going to be a question of reallocating all our resources, and also I think continuing to train our students to cope with these changes, right? Yeah.
That's really good to hear. And yeah, it is a difficult question, because I suppose that's the next chapter that we're all kind of looking towards. How do we return to normality? What is normality? And is it going to be more of a hybrid aspect? I think it will be. There'll be a lot of things that stick from here. But at the same time, we'll be looking to do as much in person as we possibly can to make up for all this lost time. So fantastic. The next question, I suppose probably best directed to you, Chris, is actually looking at the tool itself. What would you say is like your favorite feature, and what's the most useful portion of it in your opinion?
I think personally for me, I would disclaim that I really like looking at data. So I think the analytics tool is something that I find quite enjoyable to look at. And it also gives me a sense, especially from a macro perspective, what the trends are. And it also gives us a sense of how those trends change over time as well. So I think when we first launched in October, I used to go in on the more granular level just to see what conversations were looking like, mainly because I was also trying to get a sense of what these conversations would be like for a small liberal arts and sciences college like ourselves. And then I think, especially when January came around, the nature of who was on the platform and how frequently they were using the platform also shifted, especially in a run-up to our round 1 deadline as well. And we think that might also happen in, I guess, a week from now, in a run-up to our round 2 deadline. And perhaps there may be different shifts when it comes to yield programming, as Jasmine has already mentioned before. So I think looking at what students are asking, how the conversations unfold. Are there lots of exchanges between certain individuals, or are there like shorter exchanges between other individuals? I think the data and the insights into the data is probably my favorite tool that I will use, and the tool that I would use most frequently. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's great to hear, and it's great that you're making the most of that data insights. I know a lot of work has gone into it on our behalf to make it as useful and applicable for you as possible. I quite like looking at how it changes seasonally, and if you just compare one month to another, how the conversations have changed one year to another. I think our product team have done some research into that. It's really interesting to see how that's changed over COVID. Awesome. And then we've got one more question here. It's kind of more based on the ambassador side of things. So you mentioned that you incentivize them through kind of financial reward. So you pay them. How do you monitor them and remunerate them accordingly from that?
Oh, a payroll question. Maybe I'll just briefly say, and then Chris can give details if it's relevant. It's a secure platform, and we get to see who's doing what, right? So I don't like to use the word monitoring as much as it's a transparent way for us to engage students who we see as partners, I think, in this part of the process, right? Reaching out to prospects. So it's very easy for us to really understand what work is being done and to set very clear expectations and boundaries around that. And everything else, technical backend things, I'm sure it varies from institution to institution, how you do that. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I guess,
yeah, there we go.
Oops, sorry, I'll just add really quickly that
Yeah.
there is a feature as well about how much time that ambassadors also spend chatting on the platform as well. So one of the things we realize, and we said quite upfront as well, is that it does vary from person to person. Some students are very fast texters, some students think a little bit more before they craft the responses, and similarly, some students text a lot. They tend to answer all of the questions in one message block. Others tend to message throughout the day, so you'll see shorter texts, messages, and scattered throughout the day as well. So there is quite a high amount of trust that we do place in our student ambassadors as well. And I think luckily for us, one of the things we noticed is that they were all claiming less than the amount of time that they actually spent on the platform as well. So we had to kind of use a couple of months and use a couple of weeks to try to like balance out those expectations and to get to somewhere where we're compensating at a rate that is fair for the work and the amount of time that is put in by each student ambassador.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think that the amount of time they say that, because I suppose knowing the tool, they don't actually know how much time they've put in, but you do as the administrator. You can see on the back end all of that. So it's really interesting to compare what they're actually doing to what they're doing. Yeah, okay. And we've got one more question. I suppose a really important part for most kind of admissions and student recruitment teams is the systems that they're already using. And there's no way that you're kind of going to change the baseline which you've been using for years. Does the platform that you've been using, is that integrated with your CRM systems or other technologies you've been using beforehand?
I know that there's a new module that's being launched, and you're developing new things every other week. I think it would seem so. It integrates very well with what we're using thus far. But I will really defer to Sean basically and your expertise on that.
Of course, yeah. So I mean, we do have some pretty cool integrations. So the main ones are with Slate and Zapier. So if your CRM is working with a CRM that has an integration with Zapier, you can essentially pull in all of the contact information of any prospective student that signs up on Unibuddy. And typically a university will use that to identify whereabouts students are in the kind of recruitment journey in the admissions funnel and essentially better place them. From that, you can also, a lot of universities can qualify in or qualify out students based on their engagement. And at the same time, it's a good way for you to kind of work out return on investment to know, okay, we've had X number of students make an application, how many of those actually had a conversation? And how many of them ended up accepting an offer and even enrolling. So yeah, the CRM systems is obviously a really important portion of it, and it's something that we do to kind of help teams such as Chris and Jasmine's. Fantastic. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have today. So I'm going to start to wrap it up now. I'm just going to quickly share my screen to share a couple of final slides, and then we'll be on our way. So quickly play this. So yeah, I figured it is worth knowing a little bit more about the impact. Obviously, at Yale-NUS College, it's still quite new, so we don't have kind of key statistics that we can share, but that we do have it for a lot of other institutions, and it's worth noting. No matter where you are having challenges or where your objectives are in the recruitment funnel, there is a place for peer-to-peer, and it can boost certain parts of this in several ways. These are a few statistics. Just like Imperial College Business School saw an increase in the number of applications they were receiving, as much as 47% amongst those who are using the Unibuddy platform. As going on from receiving applications, it's also really beneficial to know that offer holders are more likely to accept if they've had a conversation with a current student. It's hardly surprising knowing this, and from that, if you've got more students accepting offers, you can see a general boost in enrollment, if that's something that you're looking for. And we often like to talk about this final statistic that the Erasmus School of Economics saw in Rotterdam, because this is a very international school. They have a lot of students accepting offers for numerous institutions, numerous different places at once. So the number of students who actually enroll can be difficult for them to predict. But they've seen that of those who've had a conversation with one of their students, it's qualified them to the point that 90% of those actually go on to enroll. So it's just a little bit of an overview of some of the statistics that might be worth noting. And as well as this, Unibuddy's been around for coming up to about 5 years now, but we're working with about over 430 institutions in 39 countries. And I'd say we're still very new to this part of the world. So we're really looking forward to starting to work with more institutions in Southeast Asia and Australia, New Zealand, and East Asia. So yeah, that's kind of what my job is. And if you are interested, if you'd like to kind of learn more about it, I'm more than happy to have those conversations with you. And yeah, I'd just kind of like to end it on a thanks. Thank you so much, Jasmine and Chris. It was an absolute pleasure having you both here today and sharing your experiences. And yeah, a massive thank you to all the attendees for those great questions. I hope this was useful. And yeah, there's my email address if you do have any further questions.